Hi, I'm Ben Davenport and you're watching Beats Learning, the podcast that interviews professionals from all over the music industry to understand their journeys, challenges and achievements, and as well as some advice along the way for everyone out there. For our very first guest, I'm thrilled to introduce a BAFTA-nominated composer and sound designer. Already this young composer has featured on some incredibly high-profile projects, such as Squid Game, The Challenge and Minecraft Live. But before I say too much, let's introduce our guest today, Paddy Fletcher. Cool. So, Paddy, thank you very much for coming on Beats Learning. Great to meet you.
Great to meet you. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolute pleasure. Look, obviously our first guest today, so I suppose what would be an amazing way to start is actually to hear how you started. You know, where did this all come from?
I guess so. What I mean, shall I go? Kind of how far back do you want me to go in terms of like the very beginning?
Yeah. Why not? Let's. How did music come into your life? Where was that stem from? What was your influence there?
That's a good question. I think So quite a musical family. Mum and dad played the piano. They sang and still do sing in choirs, and so there was always music in the house. Amazing. There was a piano in the house, so I always remember looking at the piano and wondering what that was. I was looking up at the piano from down on the floor, and then banging away on that. I never learnt piano from a young age, but I was always just sort of like banging away on it and wondering how that works. And dad played the guitar, so I think I was more interested in the guitar. I remember like trying to pick up his guitar from a young age. And then I learnt guitar probably from like 5 or 6. I had guitar lessons all the way into school and then through school, and then picked up other instruments as well. I played saxophone at school.
Oh wow!
And music at school was kind of just sort of music and like fun. I was never really thinking about it as a career when I was younger. Yeah. It wasn't like I was always from from day dot. But then I took music for GCSE and then music tech for A level.
Right. Okay.
And that was probably the first time, because I've been playing in a band up to that point, and I think at that point I was like, okay, maybe I do want to do music. Fair. And I think at that point I wanted to be a rock star. So I was still...
As we all did, yeah.
the dream of rock star was still alive and well at that point. And that was great. And that was the first time I started sort of like writing stuff on my own. Yeah. So I was writing with sitting down with the guitar and messing around with stuff. And then took music production at university. Okay. Sort of went up another level there. And I think at that point, probably going into uni, I was still on the kind of rock star kind of idea, but maybe more into kind of production and like things like that. Yeah. But I think that faded away quite quickly. And I think there was actually a period at the beginning of uni where I was thinking, I don't really know what I'm going to do music-wise. And like weirdly, this is what I always sort of talk about, is that I've always loved film. Yep. And like film has always been my kind of way of getting into kind of stories, because I'm not the best reader in the world. I'm not like an avid reader. So I think film and watching things was my way of kind of getting into that. And I've always loved behind the scenes on films. Yeah. So I've always remember like, watching the kind of BTS stuff. And so then at uni, part of our course, very, very wide course, from all the way from like learning about acoustics to improvisation, like kind of advanced compositional stuff, quite broad, a little bit shallow, but quite broad. There was a module which was post-production. Okay. And in that module, there was a project that we had to do where we had to replace all of the sound on a sort of 10-minute clip of music, of film. And I remember just sticking my hand up in our group and saying, "Oh, I'll do the music." Amazing. The other people in the group were more interested in doing the sound effects and sound design. Yeah. And I had to go at the music. And I remember people sort of talk about like a light coming on, but it was a moment where I suddenly thought it was like 10 minutes of a horror film. And I was sitting there just like watching it. We were watching it in a group, and I was just thinking, I really want to have a go at writing the music for this. Yeah. Like I just want to go back to my room and just start like throwing some ideas down and like having a go at this. Amazing. And it was just this kind of moment where I just kind of suddenly thought, yeah, this is really good fun. I feel like I can do this. Yeah. And so that kind of like lit the fire for wanting to then go down that route. Up until that point, film music, I'd always been aware of it. Yeah. But it had never really crossed my mind that it was a job that I could do. Probably because I always thought that it was it was done by the kind of musicians who were way superior to me. I remember saying to my mum, like, "Oh no, I'm not going to do film music because I'm not John Williams and I'm not Hans Zimmer.
Yeah, big names to follow.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, I thought that was what they did, and that was a completely different kind of channel and a completely different career, and it hadn't crossed my mind that the sort of umbrella term media composer covers so much other stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
And there's a huge kind of world of TV, film, documentary, all kinds of stuff. And that was I just hadn't really considered that as a career path.
Okay.
And then this kind of came along, and it came along at a time when I was thinking, I need a job, because I think I was sort of early 20s at this point, and I was like, I need a job. And media composer is a job. You work on things as a kind of project by project. You get given a kind of a brief and a time limit, and it kind of just all kind of came along at the right time that I sort of saw this as a viable career option rather than going off and being an artist and locking myself in a room and trying to write an album and all that, because I just don't think I was ever going to be that kind of a musician, really. I think slightly lost my train of thought on that.
So obviously, taking your background, you've got family in music, as you say. You learned to play the saxophone, the guitar. Obviously, two widely different instruments there. What do you think? How do you think they've influenced your sort of kind of now career and where you're going with, and how you construct your sort of kind of concepts of composition?
Yeah, I mean, actually, in hindsight, for the job that I do now, if I'd learnt piano, it would have been a lot easier.
Of course, yeah.
Great thing about piano is it's all just laid out in front of you.
Yeah.
But guitar was definitely the first place where I just that was where I was just sort of like putting ideas together, because I was quite disinterested in like learning guitar to a really high level. I never got to grade 8 or anything like that. I kind of slightly gave up on practicing and just started playing. Big difference between the two, but. That was probably the guitar was the first place where I was just experimenting with how things sound. Like, this sounds good, I want to play like this or whatever. But at the same time, learning saxophone, probably around the time that I was doing kind of sort of GCSE music and things like that, obviously reading music and learning the kind of theoretical side of music was quite important to me. And that kind of definitely built the kind of building blocks of writing music. And I played a lot of jazz as well.
Amazing. Okay.
On sax, I played like a big band at school, which was great fun. And so I got to play quite a wide range of music from sort of sax, and then on guitar as well. Obviously, I was playing in a band, so I was playing loads of indie rock and stuff like that.
Okay.
That was definitely kind of my kind of starting point for that. But yeah, having the guitar from such a young age has definitely been helpful, because it's great to have something really familiar to go back to.
Yeah.
And you can just sit down with the guitar and just kind of play through, some ideas you have. In terms of like writing stuff now, I've picked like piano, I've sort of picked up along the way and self-taught myself, because for writing stuff from a blank page, a piano is really fundamental in just sort of mapping out what a piece of music is going to be, for me anyway.
Yeah.
Writing stuff on a guitar, if it's a guitar based piece of music, great. But otherwise it tends to be, it's a nice place to come back to. It's like, how can I get some guitar onto this? Maybe there's also a whole nother kind of sound world from a guitar if you start putting it through effects and things like that. And being really familiar with playing guitar, I can unlock quite a lot of other sounds out of it, which is always really good fun. Tried to do a bit more of that with some of that with saxophone, but not quite as often. I'm not usually picking up the sax as often as the guitar.
Yeah. So obviously not meaning to jump ahead too quickly, but obviously, how would you? What was your approach to starting a new project? 'Cause obviously, you've got some noble projects, and we'll come on to that in a second. How would you start? Where do you even begin?
It's a good question, and I think a lot of composers we do have a fear of the blank page.
Yeah.
But I think one of the advantages of being one of the characteristics of being a kind of media composer is that you are working with a brief, and usually up until that point, when you first sit down at Logic or whatever it is, there's probably been some stuff leading up to that point that hopefully has led you to something in your head that when you sit down and open Logic, you've got some kind of idea in your
absolutely.
head, and that's about like digesting the brief and having a conversation with whoever it is, if it's director or producer, and making sure you get onto the kind of right the right train of thought and the right ballpark for what they want. In terms of actually kind of coming up with ideas, I always think it's good to I think you need to think quite carefully before you launch into something.
Of course.
But I tend to kind of I like to get going with a few ideas and like get through a few ideas quite quickly, and then listen back and kind of get on with some things, rather than I'm guilty of it in that I'll sit on one idea that I really like for a little bit of time, and I'll be like, I think this is good, and then and after a while you might kid yourself into thinking it's better than it is. But I think it's important to kind of get through an idea, and then keep moving through new ideas and get stuff out. I think it was Ed Sheeran who said, he was talking about songwriting, but I think it translates in that it's like a tap with dirty water.
Okay.
And you need to keep the tap flowing, get the dirty water out, and eventually, hopefully, you end up with some clean water at the end of it, which I quite like. And I think just you have to be kind of honest with your own work when you're listening back to it the first time, and you go, is it good? Could it be better? But, I mean, in terms of were you thinking in terms of a whole project, or like?
Well, I suppose obviously you span across a number of different formats, right? Obviously you've got TV, you've got film, you've got commercials and things like that, and they're going from things like Squid Game, and obviously we'll come on to that in a second, because that's obviously a fantastic thing for you, obviously BAFTA-nominated with that one. But when it comes to, I suppose there's a different parts to this question, because obviously when you've got the collaborative style, you're working for directors and they've got a goal and a vision, how do you align yourselves to them and the broader vision that they have, or the broader goal that they have? But then obviously when you're then given perhaps more creative freedom, perhaps, how do you differentiate? What differs for you in that scenario?
No, that's a good question, because I think it's it is quite fundamental to being a composer in TV and film, in that you're not just doing your music. Even though it is your music, at the end of the day, it's going to have something in you coming out of it. But you are definitely in the service of the project that you're working on. So the director has got the vision for their project, and if that's if it's a narrative piece, it's like a short film, that might be coming just from an idea in their head. Or if it's a commercial, it's probably coming all the way down from like a brand and their brand strategy. So everything you're doing is kind of in response to what they want. And I think your first problem is just to work out what they want.
Fair. Obviously, you've worked with like Burberry, Vogue, Microsoft, some big brands. How demanded are these people? What creative freedom do you get with these?
Actually, I mean, on those ones in particular, that was a while ago, and actually that was I was actually more working with a director. And it was it was their piece, and it was more of an artistic piece actually. So that was on the easier side of things, where you're not really working on a really kind of demanding kind of structure. But on some other branded stuff where you're working on almost more of like a brand campaign, and you're kind of working out what it is that they, what they want. I'm just trying to think of a good example for you here.
Or how would you perhaps start something like that? Obviously, I know you mentioned your briefs, especially sort of kind of working in sync and things like that, but a director comes to you and they've got a very specific goal. They've put it to you. They've told you exactly what they want. and obviously it's not really a blank page, is it? They've kind of spelt it out. You've just kind of got to go over it in your own sort of style. How would you approach something like that to start with then?
Yeah, well, you might quite often be presented with reference material.
Okay.
Whether that's music or it might be just a film or something or another type of thing. And actually, at one end of the scale, on the commercial side of things, you might be in a position where they have got a piece of music that they really like.
Okay.
And they can't use it because it's got a six-figure
price, copyright and everything, licensing, etc.
That's really common in advertising, and you will quite often get asked to do something which is, you might get pushed into a corner being like, oh, can you just sort of do a sound alike of this?
Okay.
And then you're slightly composing yourself out of jail.
Fair enough.
Because you do have to be really careful, and you're the first person they come to. If something ends up online or on TV that sounds too much like something else, you get a phone call from a lawyer, basically. So there, you've got to be really careful, and it's actually a skill in itself, and that you might just want to take the essence of that thing, whatever it is, if it's a particular kind of drum beat or something, and you've got to kind of work out what is it exactly about that they really like. And once you kind of crack that, then you can say, okay, all right, well, they really like that bit, but how about if I translate that into this? That if it's a drum sound, for example, that can be quite an easy way to kind of get into something and get something going. But if they're really, really wedded to like a chord structure or a melody, that can be a bit more difficult. Well,
funny you say that, because obviously you've had the Ed Sheeran, Stevie Wonder scenario going on recently, right? And let's be honest, the chord progressions, the 4 universal chords which are used in 60% of all pop tracks, from going up from old to new. How do things like that, when you've got something that's so universal and so universally used, let's say, but obviously you want to embed that perhaps into your composition, do you try to just use the concept, the basis, the foundations of it, or do you try and expand it? Where do you stand on that sort of thing?
Yeah, no, that is difficult, and I think in a way, if you can come up with something really kind of new and interesting, just taking a few strands, a few threads from another artist or something, and I think that's it's really difficult in songwriting, particularly in pop music at the moment, because people are really, really, really kind of sold on a certain kind of way to write pop songs at the moment. You talk about the 4 chord problem, and it's like, how do you kind of get yourself out of that? I think Ed Sheeran's point was just like, the whole reason why we're in this position is because everyone's writing the same chords and the same thing. Like, it's kind of inevitable that people are going to start copying each other. But I think on the kind of film and TV side of things, one of the things that happens quite a lot is that a TV show or an advert, a TV show in particular, will get temped. They'll have temp music. Okay. And so it might have a whole load of music from another composer on a different TV show. Right. And that will, sometimes it'll all be from the same TV show. Sometimes they'll pull in temp from all kinds of different films and stuff. Okay, a little bit of a mess, but it'll be quite specific to what that scene is doing. And then you're sort of, you're kind of moving yourself into that sound world. Okay. Maybe it's like orchestral or something, and so they'll if they're using a kind of orchestral palette of temp, then as long as you're kind of in the orchestral world, you're kind of that's a first place that you're kind of go to. But that's another place where you have to be definitely a bit careful of not ripping people off.
So where do you think you get the most creative freedom then? In what format would that be? Obviously, we mentioned TV, film, commercials, etc. Yeah,
I would say definitely on the kind of more narrative side of things. Yeah. Particularly if it's like a short film or a passion project.
Well, you had Caught Out, the documentary, right? That was obviously a narrative.
Yeah, so I did some additional music on that when I was back when I was working as an assistant, and that was Yeah, that was an interesting one because I was sort of writing additional music at a point when most of the music had been written for the documentary.
Yeah,
it's just there was a few gaps that needed filling in because of the way the kind of the documentary, the time, the kind of schedule had gone. There was basically some other bits that needed filling in, and that was an interesting thing because I was basically given a license to kind of write within the structure of the sound world.
Yeah.
And so you're just kind of trying to kind of slot into that and like finish it off basically. So that was quite a good exercise in learning how to kind of do that. And I knew the composer really, really well.
Yeah.
So
adapt into their style, right?
Exactly. And I'd already been working on that documentary.
Yeah.
So I kind of knew where everything was in terms of how to do that. But yeah, I would say in terms of creative freedom, if you're working on a project with a director, maybe they're doing a really kind of small little short film just on their own, and they might have hired you, to do something just, as a passion project for free.
Okay.
Then, they might hand it over to you and just be like, this is up to you in terms of what you interpret. And that can be quite difficult because actually
too much freedom, right?
Well, what I've always thought is that I like a set of instructions and a time limit and a brief. I mean, the shorter the time limit, the better for me, usually. And so if you suddenly get handed a kind of a blank check, it can be a bit daunting.
Yeah.
But then it's about your discussion with the director and
absolutely,
and getting inside their head, because I think as you kind of said earlier, it's like they've got this big idea in their head. And along the way, they're translating that idea into a real thing. Yeah. That you can watch, and it's always going to get slightly watered down along the way.
Yeah, of course.
And when they come to hand over the responsibility of writing music, that's a huge thing that can change. You start putting music on an edit on a film, and it can change things massively, either for the better or sometimes for the worse. So it's quite a big responsibility at that point to make sure that what they want. But it is definitely an equally interesting challenge when you do get handed a kind of a blank check, because then you're into the kind of world of coming up with whatever kind of sounds you want, and that can be a lot of fun.
Obviously, talking about using your word translating now, obviously you've also had a couple of international projects. I believe you was working with a team in Stockholm on Minecraft Live, if I'm not mistaken. Does that play any sort of kind of big impact on working with a team? Obviously not from native, let's say, from your origins.
That was a combination of people, because the production was mainly UK people.
Okay, fair enough. Okay.
But also, a lot of the production team in Stockholm were the people who make Minecraft.
Okay.
So they were coming very much from the kind of from the Minecraft angle, and then some of us were coming more from a kind of TV production angle, and we kind of met in the middle.
Amazing.
And they've obviously got Minecraft is very much their thing. Their level of Minecraft knowledge is amazing, and
everything's just in bricks.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the level of passion they have about that game is unbelievable. And I was coming in, from a point of view of just writing some music for the kind of like live broadcast element to kind of tie everything together. And that's a slightly tricky one, because I remember actually we were doing some sort of sound design as well for that, and I was doing a few sound design, like sound effects stuff for like one of the VTs. One of the creators came over and was like, "Oh, we can't have that particular sound because I think it was the sound of a bird actually." Okay. And was like, "Oh, we don't have that particular bird in that particular world." Right. Okay. And that level of detail was like, I was like, "Wow, that's amazing." And they were in terms of music, they were quite open to me doing something sort of relatively, freely. They had some quite, some specific notes that they didn't want things to sound a certain way. I think they had wanted to use the Minecraft music, but they have a bit of a kind of licensing issue.
Okay.
I mean that was an interesting project because I was sort of part of a wider production team that was building, in the space of 2 weeks, they would effectively build a TV studio from nothing, and then build a whole TV show basically from out of the ground. And being there, I had a little mobile rig tucked away in a corner, and I was just writing as much music as was needed in between rehearsals, and then also getting to watch all kinds of other things going on, like besides the camera team and the set design and everything, and then being part of the live broadcast truck, which was parked outside. That's where I was like queuing the music in as part of the live broadcast. So that was a completely bonkers experience, actually.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, like, how do you sort of kind of get over nerves and sort of kind of address a live composition? Because obviously everything else, you can go over it, record it, edit it, change it, do what you want until you're perfectly happy and the director's perfectly happy. Obviously, in a live experience, it must be quite daunting. What was going through your head at that point?
I mean, it wasn't total. It was live in that it was a live broadcast. The music I was doing, I wasn't playing it live.
Okay, all right.
I was kind of live queuing stuff.
Right. Okay.
On a running order.
Yeah.
And there were sound effects as well. Some of the sound effects were quite specific to like what was happening, and it was all live, and it was going out to like millions of people.
That's crazy.
So I had to be quite careful.
Yeah.
That was because usually you're tucked away in your studio, and no one else is listening.
Yeah.
Sending stuff away to people is nerve-wracking, but it wasn't as nerve-wracking as that. I did actually have a live experience this year.
Okay.
Because I did the music. Me and the composer I used to work for, Nick Foster, we did the music for the Today podcast, which is the Radio 4 podcast. And we got invited to do a live rendition of that theme they did like a live, like a kind of live show, broadcast. And so sadly Nick couldn't make it in the end. But I had to draft in some help. We had to do a kind of like, we had a piano and a laptop.
Wow,
basically.
okay.
We couldn't recreate the whole thing live because it wouldn't have been practical. But that was basically playing a piano rendition over the top of a backing track. It was a slightly clunky thing, but it kind of works, and it was good fun. But that was a live TV audience of about 500 or 600 people.
Oh wow!
And I hadn't done anything like since playing in a band back at school. Basically, I hadn't really played live at all, and so that was pretty nerve wracking. That wasn't actually going out live; that was being recorded live, and then it went out.
Good as still got 500-600 people sitting there watching.
But a completely different discipline to suddenly be thrust back into playing live.
Well, talking about different disciplines, obviously sticking on the BBC side of things, obviously outside of your podcast, you released your first track, Phil, in 2020, which obviously got massive radio play on Radio 6, if I'm not mistaken. How was that sort of kind of...
I think we might need to rephrase this.
Okay, go for it.
So I have released some stuff on my own.
Yeah.
I've done some like EPs and stuff, and then I wrote a whole load of sort of electronic stuff. Basically, I wrote that for a music library.
Okay.
And it has been used on Radio 6, but it's not airplay.
Okay.
It was used as a...
Poor research.
Yeah, no, it was fine. It was basically, it was a really nice surprise, but they on one of their shows, they used it as basically as like a kind of like a music bed throughout the show.
Okay.
And it got reused for like, it was basically they were running a whole new series. I think it was on their new... I'm not quite sure what it was. I can't remember now. But they were using it basically as a track bed. And I was just listening to Six Music in the evening, and all of a sudden this piece of music was being used in the background. I was like, I think I recognise this.
And it was like, I was like, experience.
It was actually. It's great when that kind of thing happens, because you're like, wow, it's working.
Yeah.
It's going out into the ether, and people are using it. But hopefully maybe one day Six Music might play
fair
a piece of my music where it's
Watch this
actually
space, watch this space. Come on to future projects later. But like, this is purely my curiosity more than anything. When you get sort of like one of your tracks or sort of kind of soundscapes or one of your compositions played in a situation like that, do you suddenly find people sort of kind of searching who made this music, and then does your following get a boost? You know, do you find you actually your socials or anything like that are impacted by the features like that?
I mean, it hasn't been not really for most of my career so far, because I haven't really worked on things with that kind of bigger what's the word I'm looking for? Following. So I haven't really worked on things with that bigger kind of following. But then I guess the first time it did happen was when I worked on Squid Game, the challenge.
Well, this is what I was about to come on. You're saying about not a big following.
Yeah.
Obviously, BAFTA-nominated for Squid Game, the challenge. No, what an experience. How did that feel when you got that?
That was great. I mean, that was a real nice, really, really kind of unexpected surprise. I got nominated as part of a small team of us. There was like 5 or 6 of us from the production team that they put forward for nomination. And I got nominated for doing the music, and that was kind of crazy and quite unexpected, but it was a great one to have on the CV.
So just with regards to Squid Game, then how did you come across that brief? How did that come about? How did you get that sort of intro? Let's say.
So that really came about because from my career so far, quite a big chunk of that has been spent being an assistant.
Yeah.
Up until sort of 2 and a bit years ago, I was working full time for a composer called Nick Foster.
Okay.
Before that, I was actually working for another composer, a guy called Ollie Julian. And so, I'd been working for Nick for maybe like 4 years at that point. I was moving out of working for him full time towards the end of, I think, 2022 or something. I think it was right at the end of that year. And I was sort of transitioning into going out and working on my own.
Yeah.
And his agent basically called me up and sort of said, look, there's a show that I think you'd be really good for, and we think you should pitch on. And I think it was because I'd worked on shows like the US version of The Cube.
Yeah.
Me and Nick had done that together, and that's obviously like, it's a reality kind of game style show, and Nick wasn't really doing that kind of thing anymore. He'd done quite a lot of that in the past.
Yeah.
And so this kind of show, Squid Game, the challenge, wasn't the kind of thing that I think a lot of, anyway, it was the kind of thing that Nick probably wouldn't do in the future.
Yeah.
Wasn't going to want to do it in the future. So, they decided to, they basically opened the door and said, you should pitch on this show.
Amazing.
And I kind of thought, wow, yeah, okay, this is great. I'll have a go at pitching on this. But I definitely didn't have any inkling of thinking I was going to get it.
Yeah.
I didn't actually know how many people I was pitching against, but I was sure that all of them were going to be composers who'd been doing it for many years longer than me. I think in hindsight, it's definitely a bit of luck involved, because usually on shows like this, 4, maybe 5 people are pitching at one time, and it might have less to do with how good you are as a composer. I'm not quite sure. I think there's definitely an element of luck with whether you get these pitches. And the pitch came along, and I just thought, I'll just take as good a go at this as I can. And I got it, and it was a really good end to that year. It was, I remember they told me just before Christmas that I'd got it, and so I had this like job lined up for the beginning of next year. And
fantastic.
No, it was
great.
Ways
to start, right? So obviously, look, you've already mentioned kind of how it felt getting the BAFTA nomination, but even just sort of gone working on such a high profile project, what's going through your mind at that point? Does it get the creative juices flowing? Does it hinder them? Is it, how did it feel for you at the time of getting that?
Yeah, I mean, it was an amazing thing to land. I'd obviously never really worked. I'd never I'd never done a big TV project on my own to that point. I'd co-written stuff before.
So your first one was the BAFTA-nominated. That's what a way to start.
I know, yeah, definitely a good start. But with that, they were quite specific with what they wanted because they had permission to use all the music from the original Squid Game drama.
Yeah.
So they were quite upfront initially. With the pitching phase. They kind of mentioned wanting to incorporate the theme.
Yep.
But they weren't very specific about it. And I kind of thought, okay, well, I'll do a remix.
Yeah.
And so I did a bit of a remix,
cool.
rework of that original Squid Game theme. And it turned out they really wanted to do that.
Oh, okay.
And so a lot of the music that I did, probably not half, but yeah, getting on for like half of what I did, I'd be like sampling little bits of that theme or just using little bits here and there and kind of reworking little elements and then writing a whole load of new music within that sound world.
Yeah.
And so that was a really kind of fun task because you're kind of given permission to work within another composer's sound world.
Yeah.
Without ripping them off. You don't want to be just kind of lifting directly from them.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. You want your own creative stance on it as well, right?
For sure, yeah. But there's something about the Squid Game world, which is this kind of like dystopian kind of sound world, but with the kind of like childish kind of world thrown in.
Okay.
And then also the kind of Korean instruments as well. And so that was a really fun world to kind of exist in. And I like to think that I did come up with some sort of new angles to that. And I had like so much fun putting music together for that. And really that job was about me writing like just loads and loads of stuff for them to kind of go and edit with. But then I also got to work to picture as well on some of the episodes. And so that was quite, it's a high stakes drama, like reality show.
Yeah.
So there was some really, really dramatic moments where you could go completely nuts on the music.
Well, did that kind of give you the opportunity to blend? Because obviously, not only you're a composer, as you mentioned earlier, you've got the sound design as well. Is that an opportunity that actually allowed you to sort of kind of incorporate both elements, or is that quite unique from what you normally do?
Yeah, I mean, I'd done sound design on the Cube before.
Yeah, okay, cool.
And actually it was I didn't do as much sound design on Squid Game, the challenge. There was some, there was a few bits which they used, but actually ended up being more music. But on the Cube, we would, because I was co-writing it with Nick, and for the American Cube, they wanted we were doing as much sound design as we were music, and that would be for they would have like a particular game they were playing, and they'd want a certain sound for an action, for example. There's quite a lot of throwing things into other things in the Cube. Exactly, yeah. And so you'd be throwing out loads of different options for what kind of sound design they want. And it's with sound design, it's great because you, like, anything in terms of like what you use to create sound design, anything can, anything that comes to mind that you think will kind of mimic that action. And you kind of think, oh, maybe I don't know, the sound of like scraping like a saucepan or something. And you kind of start with that, and it kind of, I don't know, it's something about like just sort of seeing something happening and thinking, what might that sound like?
Right, so I suppose if you've ever seen any of the YouTube clips where you get the behind the scenes of people doing the noise effects, films, when they're like crunching up Pringles, but it's someone stepping in the woods or something like that. But, if there's any like one that is crazy and out there that sort of kind of springs to mind that was just like, that was just nuts, but obviously made a cool sound.
I'm trying to think of something I've done off the top of my head. I'm trying to think. You have to edit here.
I'll tell you what then. Perhaps a better question. possibly a very easy question or possibly a very hard question. What's your favourite thing that you've done yet? You know, obviously you've got the notable scenario, the notable projects we've already mentioned, right? BAFTA-nominated for Squid Game, the challenge. You've had BBC podcasts, you've had Caught Out, you've had The Cube in the US, obviously Minecraft Live. What really sort of kind of has that cemented place in your heart?
That's a good question. But I think actually, I would say that I think some of the original stuff that I pitched for Squid Game, the challenge, I think it's some of the music that I've written that I've been really, really happy with how it's come out.
Okay.
And I feel like it's a good representation of like me and what I can do. And obviously it was, you know, probably the most successul thing I've done so far.
Absolutely fair.
May well be the most successful thing.
Hey, you've got a long career ahead of you, so I very much doubt that, buddy.
No, I've done like I'm trying to think now, really. No, I think that'll be it. I think that will be the most. That's the thing that I've done, I think.
Well, how about going the other way then? Is there anything that you've put forward and you've stepped back and gone, oh Christ, that was rubbish, or you know, you weren't really happy with it? Obviously the director might have loved it, but you weren't happy. Have you got, like, I wouldn't necessarily say a horror story, but is there anything that you kind of wish you hadn't done or anything like that?
I probably won't name names.
Fair, fine. Appreciate that.
No, there's definitely, on the kind of commercial side of things, something that's quite common that can happen is that usually with a commercial, you're expected to go around the houses on ideas.
Okay.
And that's just a fact of life, because the brief might change, or you know, at all levels, you've got the client and the producer and all the way down to you. Things just kind of change and go along. And sometimes what can happen is that you might write something which you and the director or the producer really like, and that's great. And maybe you kind of go through a couple of versions of that, and you end up sticking on something, and it's great and it works. And then it gets passed up the chain, and then someone's making a decision higher up which is changing things. And they go, oh, actually, no, we want to go in a different direction. And you end up going in a different direction. And that's fine. And hopefully you end up getting to something which you're still kind of like happy and proud with. But sometimes it's frustrating because you end up with something which sort of everyone knows is really kind of like drawn out from what the original brief was. Doesn't really sound like anything. It sounds kind of a bit like it's been kind of like long and drawn out, and you end up something which is just really quite unsatisfying, and that can be a shame. And so I would say that's probably the most frustrating thing. What I would say on the kind of narrative side of things, or if you're working on documentary or whatever it is.
Sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, if you're working on something narrative where you're working with a director, usually it's when you're working on something where you're then making changes and doing notes, which in itself for a media composer, that's the most important part. Usually you always get something better.
Okay.
Because it's the director's vision, it's their idea, they know what it is that they want the music to be doing.
Okay.
And if they're asking you to make a change, it's probably for a good reason. And so 9 times out of 10, you kind of they'll come back with a note and you'll go, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's really good. And then you'll change it, and then you'll watch it back and you think, yeah, that's made it better. And that's really like kind of really satisfying when that happens.
Well, a question I hope you don't mind me asking, obviously that you've got the complete worst case scenario as well. Obviously your work with the Wren boys, you went through and did all of that sort of kind of the composition, put everything together, and in the end it wasn't even used. What goes through your head in a scenario like that? It must be frustrating as hell.
Yeah, I mean it is frustrating, because if you work on something and then the music gets taken away, but it's part of the creative process, really. And I think you have to be prepared that sometimes it's not going to work out. It would be more frustrating if someone else comes along. And that happens. I mean, there's countless examples of composers getting quite good jobs because someone else has been fired. Haven't been fired yet. Almost happened recently actually, and I didn't just about manage to get it over the line in the end. But it's definitely part of the job, and I think you basically have to. Well, the first thing a lot of composers have always told me over the years is just put your ego on a shelf.
Yeah, fair.
Because if you're going into a project, at the end of the day, you are in service of what the project is. You are there to help them achieve their goal. And if you write a whole load of music, and it turns out they don't need the music in the end,
it is what it is.
It is what it is.
And
I think you just have to be prepared to take it on the chin, I guess.
Fair. So obviously, look, you're still quite a young composer. Let's be frank.
Absolutely,
what are the sort of what specific challenges have you sort of had to face during your time so far?
I think it's a very long, slow process, which for me is still definitely happening. I would actually say, I mean, just in the last year, TV wise, the TV industry is not in a great place. Just in terms of stuff just isn't really being made because we're in a bit of a sort of transitional phase while the traditional TV goes through a bit of an adjustment. But it's when you're starting out, this is like before I was an assistant, I was just sort of, I mean, I'd said that I wanted to be a media composer, TV composer. And, that doesn't then just sort of give you a job. You just kind of, you kind of have decided to go down that route. Yeah. And so for the first couple of years while I was living in London, I was DJing at weddings and catering and working behind bars. And it does feel at that point like nothing is changing because you're going around basically offering to write music for someone, but you have absolutely when you've got no portfolio, nothing.
Well, it's the credibility, isn't it? It's
for
the
sure.
reputation that you have,
Yeah, and so getting yourself up from zero does feel like a bit of an uphill struggle.
Yeah.
And I mean it was definitely a good few years where it does sort of feel like nothing is happening. And I would definitely say that it's just it's the kind of industry where it just takes a lot of time. I mean, next year will be, I think it will be the 10th year that I've been doing this.
Amazing. Okay.
And it's
anniversary. You doing anything special?
I don't know, I have to work that out. Yeah, maybe a cake of some kind.
We'll get you a Beats Learning music cake. There you go.
Absolutely. I mean, in 10 years, obviously, in the last year and a half, I've definitely had some success that has taken me up a level in terms of working on TV shows on my own. But it definitely feels like I've got sort of, one foot through the door, but not the other. And it's just a case of just continuing to, widen your network and keep pushing yourself out to people. But I do feel like, the experience that I've gained from being an assistant has sort of brought me up to this point. And it's kind of it's laid the kind of groundwork for basically building myself a career. And you get to meet loads of people, work with musicians, and also when you're an assistant, you get to watch composers do what they do and how they communicate with directors and talk to people, and just how to do the job really, because it's a multifaceted job. It's not just writing music is one bit of it. It's actually quite a small bit of it, because there's a whole manner of other bits that are sort of part of the job basically. And I've slightly forgotten what the question was.
I'd say, well, obviously you mentioned you're coming up to your 10-year anniversary. How do you think you've changed during that period? Is it from whether it be the way you approach a brief, or whether it's how you approach creating a sound? What's changed in you over them years, or if anything?
I've learned in the last 10 years. I mean, actually, maybe in the last definitely in the years when I was working as an assistant. Yeah, just learned so much more about the whole job of what it means to write music for someone else, as in that the whole process of being a media composer, a TV composer. Definitely sort of grown into, how to be a freelancer.
Okay.
Because that's a really big part of it. Because you are entirely responsible for how you build your business. And it, it's lost my train of thought.
So looking at sort of, you mentioned obviously being a freelancer. How do you go about sourcing new jobs? You wake up in the morning, we're about to turn into the new year. Obviously this is pre-recorded, so this is in November, but look, it's January now. What are you doing this year to line yourself up work?
Good question. It's this year I've done a lot of pitching.
Obviously don't tell anyone what you're doing, otherwise they might steal it, but you'll be fine.
This year I've been lucky enough to work with quite a few new directors, young directors who are doing a combination of creative and commercial work, and I've done a few small projects for them. I've also been pitching on some TV shows. Done a couple of pitches this year, which sadly haven't come my way, but the first big pitch I did come off. So I guess
amazing.
It's
ups and downs,
ups
right?
And downs.
Yeah.
And it is just like it's kind of it's a fundamental question, definitely when you're in the early part of your career, as to how you actually get work.
Yeah.
I actually think there's a huge amount of luck involved in it.
Absolutely.
Because it's about if you're obviously always networking and pushing yourself around and looking for opportunities to meet people, and opportunities come along. Someone needs music at that time. That the other thing I always kind of think about is that when you're contacting someone, either if it's a friend or someone who says, I know someone who's a producer or a director, when you contact that person, the chances of them needing a composer at that very moment are almost nil, unless you're really, really lucky. And it's about, I think, increasing your chances of finding work from that kind of position is just to you basically want to be putting yourself in front of as many people as possible, at as much as possible, as often as possible, in the hope that they are going to be needing music at that time. I mean, it's not as simple as just machine gunning your way around.
Of course,
but it's
it's a beautiful segue, to be honest with you, to my sort of kind of next question, which is obviously actually about sort of kind of networking and relationships. And how important is that to this scene? I think you kind of answered the question perhaps already, but maybe recap.
Really important. I mean, it's it's all freelance. I mean, there's a very small number of composers who work in-house in some places, but you are definitely responsible for going out and finding work. And actually, I can trace most of the progress I've made to this point. Just the fact that the way that I got an assisting job about 6-7 years ago was I was going to an event that a music software company were hosting. And it was a composer doing a demo. And I'd met that composer afterwards. That composer ended up introducing me to someone at the right time. And then the composer that they knew turned out to be the composers that I would end up working for the next 5 years. And I remember I almost didn't go to that event. That event was just it was just a thing that I kind of decided to go to. And if I hadn't gone to that event, I wouldn't have met that person.
Crazy.
So I've kind of
the domino effect from that one yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I've always kind of thought, now go to everything. Go to everything. And that I definitely would advise to people starting out now, is that you can't do enough networking really. You just got to keep pushing yourself around to as many people as possible.
Well, you mentioned obviously that there's numerous parts to sort of kind of what you do, and it's not just about playing the piano or doing this or doing that. What do you think are some of the most critical? What would you say? What skills would you say are the most critical to succeed in this?
I think obviously the the music's got to be good.
Of course, yeah. They're not going to get too far if it's not, is it?
You need to be able to write good music.
Yeah.
What kind of music that is, though, is completely, open, because there are plenty of composers who are just very, very specific at one thing they do, and if you ask them to do something else, they probably wouldn't be very good at it. There are other composers who are more versatile. So the music really, will not take care of itself, but like if you're going into it, hopefully you're going to have some kind of musical offering to give. The rest, in terms of other things that are really important, like the skills to be able to talk to a director or a producer or whoever it is and find out what it is that they want. To be able to talk to them on their level and understand their thought process, and be able to translate their ideas into something that you can then go and take away and write music with. Because what I've found sort of so far in my career is that you get quite an array of language and things. Some people, sometimes you'll get onto a Zoom call with someone, and straight off they'll just kind of say, "Oh, well, I know absolutely nothing about music. I don't really know what kind of music I'm going to want." And they'll kind of really start off from a position of, I have absolutely no idea. And at that point, you're just kind of, you kind of just got to just kind of coax something out of them and kind of make some suggestions and just be kind of personable and chat basically. And then sometimes actually you're going to get thrown a whole load of stuff which is going to make absolutely no sense whatsoever. They're going to be using kind of all kinds of adjectives to describe music, which might not necessarily mean what they think they mean.
So you got to translate it basically.
Then it's like it's translating what they're saying. But then I think one of the most fundamental things which I always think of, which is what I'm always trying to be aware of, and that I've learned up to this point, is that I think I mentioned this a bit earlier, like whether it's an advert or a piece of narrative, adding music to something is a really, really powerful tool.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of responsibility.
It creates the drama, right?
Absolutely. And it can create too much drama. It can take the drama away. It can be a nuisance. It can get in the way of dialogue, whatever it is. So it's really, really important, just when you're having that first conversation with the director or whoever it is like, why are we deciding to have this bit of music here? We're making a decision to have the music here. Why? Most of the time, the kind of overarching answer to that is we want to make this better, or we want to make this whatever it is. And actually, sometimes you have to be honest and go, actually, this is a really delicate moment here. We don't want to have too much music. We want to be really, really delicate, and we want to kind of pull back or whatever it is. And so that's a really kind of crucial, fundamental thing that I've found is that, like, just be careful.
But do you ever like bounce your ideas off of friends or anything before you go back to the director to go, am I being a bit over the top or anything like that? Do you sort of kind of utilize anyone else to help in that sense?
Yeah, I've definitely done that. I've also used my girlfriend a few times.
Of course.
Because sometimes you get really like wound up on a piece. Particularly I find if it's the person you're working with, you've worked with loads before, and you've got a good working relationship with them, I won't feel quite so much pressure off the first instance to get it absolutely right.
Okay.
Obviously, you're going to want to get it right. But if it's someone I don't know, first time working with them, and you're really trying to make a good first impression, that's when sometimes I can get kind of inside my own head and like really, really worry about something. And that's where I'll probably call my girlfriend and be like, does this sound terrible? Does it sound okay? And yeah, it's good to be able to do that. I don't know, I've always been a little bit wary of sending stuff around to other people, because just flipping it round the other way, I've always been a bit bad at, back when I was working as an assistant, sometimes they would just pull me in and say, "Oh, I've just done this. How does this sound?" And if it's like a cue for an episode of something, I'm like, well, I'm the assistant and you're the composer with 25 years experience. Like, I don't want to say anything, because usually it's great, but I don't want, if they're looking for really honest feedback. And in hindsight, actually,
honesty or your job, which one do you go for?
I mean, in hindsight now, like from if one day I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I've got an assistant in that exact scenario, I will definitely be wanting to impress on them. Be honest,
of course, absolutely,
because this is your job as well, and I really, really value your input. But I was always a bit bad at being honest. It was never like I was kind of holding back from saying this is terrible, but it was like I don't know. I was reluctant to kind of give just like any comments at all. But I've had it recently where a friend who's sort of similar kind of level to me career wise was doing some assisting work, and he'd written a whole load of stuff, and he just wanted to. He was having a bit of trouble like mixing, just on the mix, and I could tell he was having a little bit of a moment. He wasn't quite sure, and he just winged some stuff over for me to listen to, and that was really a moment where it was just like a confirmation. And there was a few little things that I suggested, but it was more like I was saying, no, you're doing it bang on. It sounds great. Go for it, do it. And even if it's that, it's just looking for someone to just be like, no, you're doing a good job.
Give you that pat on the reassurance.
It hasn't happened that many times when like you kind of, you send something and someone goes,
that's a load of shit.
I don't know, this might be shit. But what are friends for?
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, like you kind of mentioned sort of kind of using friends, using partners and various people obviously in the scene. But are there any sort of kind of tools or sort of kind of resources or even just general communities that you've used throughout your career that have really helped you?
I tell you, there is a good one. There's a Facebook group called Scorecast.
Okay.
I think there's an international one, but the one I'm on is Scorecast London.
Okay.
And it's basically a Facebook group filled with TV film composers. Amazing. I think it's mainly TV and film composers of all lengths. All levels of experience.
Yeah, of course.
It's just a really good directory almost for like, because even if you're not posting something, like a question, you can go on and just search compressing snare drum. You type that in and a whole load of posts will come up about that or something. If you're interested in what studio chair should be best for you, you can go on the Scorecast on it and type studio chair in. Oh wow! And 50 posts will come up, because once a month,
ones don't squeak.
Well, once a month someone will post being like, has anyone got any good chair options? And they'll be like, it gets the most traction of anything on that group. People talk, oh no, I've got this chair. Chair. And like, it's nuts. But it's a really good place to. And actually, if you've got a really burning question for something that needs doing, you can post on there, and people will come out of the woodwork from.
So Scorecast, did you say? Yeah,
Scorecast.
That's cool.
Yeah, and it's also just a good. I mean, for for younger composers to just be as a part of that community and just see things coming in, seeing the kind of questions that people are asking, because people are asking quite kind of detailed questions about licensing and about hiring players and things like that. And it's a really good window into the kind of wider job of being a TV composer, because particularly when you get up to working on bigger projects, bigger budget stuff, like when I was working as an assistant in the kind of music department, that's when you get to see all the other aspects of what's going on, because you've got people looking for fixers to book orchestras and studio sessions, orchestrators, who are going to take the stuff that you've written, translate it onto dots on a page and put it in front of the player to play. And actually, Scorecast is a good hub for seeing that kind of stuff come together. It's also quite an entertaining place.
Yeah.
Because
I bet.
people will post all kinds of things, and you'll get, you get a huge amount of chat going on, which can be quite funny.
So let's, obviously you mentioned there sort of kind of newbies and obviously the youth coming through. What would your advice to be to these who perhaps are struggling to find their own voice or their own niche in sort of kind of composition? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, because I think my main kind of depth of experience definitely comes from the sort of first 10 years of this career, which has sort of got me from the very beginning to being an assistant to kind of now transitioning myself into my own career. And I've had a few conversations with composers starting out, and I would say from the very first position that you when you're getting into it, you might just be starting out your musical journey in terms of experimenting with what you can do, but the chances are you might already have been writing some kind of music that just you write, and it's just you're really good at it. And if you've got a particular genre that you're really good at, you might be a really good beat programmer, a really good guitarist, or whatever it is. You might not even play an instrument. You might be an absolute whiz on Logic at programming stuff. I would say write with what you're comfortable at and get a whole load of stuff finished and done, and get that up on some kind of profile, because then you've got a bit of what you can do really, really well. And I think actually I was quite guilty of not doing this when I was really first starting out. I was trying to fill up my portfolio with as much different music as possible, as broader music as possible, and that can be good. But if you're spreading yourself really thinly and sort of posting your learnings as you go,
especially if the quality drops going into a different genre, right?
For sure, yeah. And I don't think you want to be highlighting the fact that you're having a go at everything.
Yeah. Fine. Okay.
So I would say, I was thinking about this the other day, and I would say initially, if there's something that you're really good at, one particular instrument or whatever it is, get some stuff out like that. The second thing I would say, maybe actually, I don't know, maybe this should come first, is I was just as a warning, I was thinking about this. I would say maybe think about the reasons it is. Are we talking about getting into TV and film?
Oh, no, it's more, I suppose it could be any format, right? If someone was, whether it's a case of they're trying to work out their genre, whether they're trying to work out which format or direction they want to go in, how would you approach it? How would you sort of kind of think to yourself, right, this is what I like, or this is what I don't like, etc. It's a very open question. It's up to you.
Oh, no, really. Sure. I know what you mean. Yeah. Well, no, I would say that actually the second bit maybe doesn't stand. That if you're going into media and film, I would say you want to be questioning as to why you're wanting to do that. But music in general, I think you've got to start from a position of having fun. Yeah, absolutely. And a little bit like how I was talking about, with your thing, do your thing as well as you can. Yeah. That has to be the sort of starting point. And I think there's a huge amount of pressure on young musicians who, in the world of social media and everything being up and online, and how many likes you're getting and traction and things like this. Absolutely. A lot of young musicians are going to be sitting in their rooms thinking, I need to write something that people are going to like. And that can be really daunting. Really daunting. And I think can maybe push you into making bad decisions or not making any decisions at all. So I think, I think I've heard a lot of people saying, just write, what you want to write initially. What makes you happy. What makes you happy, exactly. I mean, it might not even be that you might not be wanting to make a career in music. You might just want to write some stuff and put it up on SoundCloud or whatever it is. And just see where it goes. Who knows? You might turn out to be an absolute genius, and and you'll have to give up your day job. See, I assume it differs based on the opportunities you get as well. If you're going after a particular goal, but you don't get any opportunities there, but something else comes up, that obviously will perhaps guide you in some way as to where you're going to go next or what you're going to do with your career path. Exactly. Yeah, and you hear a lot of examples of people who suddenly get an opportunity to write music for something completely different. You know, they might get offered to write something for a video game, or they might just be like, you know, a singer-songwriter, and someone says, "Oh, I need some music writing for a musical or something," and they suddenly just go, "Oh, great, yeah, I'll have a go at that." And that could be, you know, that could lead to anything. Yeah. So yeah, the other thing I would say, definitely be open. Yeah, absolutely. To doing anything, as long as it's, if you're writing music, then that, you know, that has to be the best thing there, I think.
Well, that's a fantastic transition to, I think, probably the last point we really want to cover. What's next for Paddy Fletcher?
Find more work.
Okay.
What's next for me? I am hopefully about to. Well, this is coming out in January, so hopefully I will have been helping out 2 composers who need some extra music writing on some documentaries that they're working on. They've kind of crashed into some deadlines, and they kind of need to expand their workforce. That's the thing. Actually, a lot of composers who are much further up the ladder from me, they're working with, you know, teams, you know, underneath them. So you need assistants, and you need additional writers to kind of take up some of the extra work. So I'm doing some additional work with some people coming up, and it's a funny one.
I was gonna say, I believe you'd go doing stuff with some young directors or narrative work. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I've been doing a couple of short films with some people this year.
That's cool.
And they're great. Short films are great to work on, because it's actually a little bit like what you were talking about earlier. They're quite a kind of free place to work in. Cool. In terms of, you know, you're working on a brief, but the director's probably going to be relatively open as to what you write, and you get it's a really collaborative,
amazing
process, and hopefully a few more of those coming up. So one thing I would say, I wonder if this will be putting in, but I'm waiting to see. It's just kind of speculative, so I don't know if this will want to go in or not, but hopefully I'm going to be working on series 2 of Squid Game, the challenge.
Exciting. Fingers crossed for you.
Fingers crossed. I've had it verbally, but not like definitely. So I don't know. We'll have to see whether or not we'll leave that in.
You may have just answered my next question, which was going to be, what are you most excited about that's kind of in your future?
I'm really excited to keep working with the directors, particularly some of the narrative directors that I've met this year, because they've got a huge amount of talent, and they've got loads of ideas for stuff going forward, and I'd love to keep working with them basically.
Amazing. So is there anything not in your pipeline yet that you'd like to explore eventually?
Large scale sci-fi epic.
the next Aliens film done. There's probably going to be another 5 of them anyway, so we'll be all right.
Yeah, hopefully maybe I could get onto one of them. I mean, is that essentially the question of what would be the kind of
well, what, you know, obviously, well, not necessarily the end.
Certainly
not the end.
Oh, the end
but
goal.
More like if even if it was just something to explore, obviously, you know, you've dipped your toe into the world of games with Minecraft. You know, is that a format you'd like to sort of kind of make some strides in? If it was more just bigger films, that type of thing, you know, is there just a general area that you'd like to sort of kind of explore, dip your toe into, so to speak?
Yeah, I'd love to do more work in documentary stuff. Having done a bit already. Working as an assistant, and then also I've done some additional stuff on some documentaries. That is definitely an area where I'd like to get some work of my own, because there's some great stuff being made.
Yeah, it really is.
And you get to explore some amazing stories. I mean, there seems to be no end to amazing stories that seem to come out of somewhere. And I mean, I'd like to, you know, work on the kind of things where I can write narratively, because I feel like that's the sort of thing that I can work that's the kind of thing that I can do quite not comfortably, I say, but it's I feel like that's the sort of work that I want to do and can do best.
Yeah.
It's where I feel like I'm writing best is writing narratively. So to work on drama and things like that eventually.
Is there anyone that you would love to work with? Obviously, we've mentioned the names of like Hans Zimmer, John Williams, and people like that. You know, is there like an idol that you have in this scene that you be your sort of kind of your Golden Globe, or so to speak?
No, I'm not sure there's anyone in particular, like on the kind of music side of things. I'm not sure. I mean, it would be amazing to work on, because on these kind of, let's take Hans Zimmer for example, on the kind of films that he's done, on these kind of huge large scale feature films. To be involved in some way on one of those,
of course,
at some point would be amazing, even if it was doing because they have people doing additional programming and all kinds of things. It's teams of people work on these big films, and just to kind of like to dip in and to work onto one of those films would be amazing, where you're kind of working on the music department is covering such a wide range of things, and to work on a film of that scale and size would be amazing. Even if it was just as a sort of fringe member of the music department. If there was, if I could just bang a triangle or a tambourine, that would be fun enough. But no, there's no. I'm trying to think of like a specific thing. I mean, if I'll always pick up the phone to Christopher Nolan.
I'd like to be the new Batman, but maybe that's another conversation. So how do you see this industry evolving? Obviously, look, over the past few years, it's changed dramatically, especially with like COVID coming in as well, and people sort of kind of suddenly being bedroom DJs and all the live streams, and obviously everything online, and how just generally, how do you see things changing just from your perspective?
Well, I think the industry is changing, in a number of ways. I would say I've definitely been part of a wave of composers who've come in at a time when the barriers to entry to actually writing music and getting into it have definitely reduced. The tools that we have are getting scarily good, like unbelievably good, just the level, the production value that you can gain just from having not wildly expensive equipment. So it is definitely becoming easier to kind of do what we do. I think it raises the bar in terms of what you should be able to differentiate yourself from other people.
We've also got AI as well, and obviously look, it's a bit of a dirty word and not necessarily something I want to go dive into today. But with the likes of AI coming out, obviously we're seeing it across numerous massive forums and things like that. Everyone's having issues with it. Licensing companies and things like that, they're having to change the way, there's governing bodies that are having to reconsider how they sort of kind of look at AI produced music. How does that sort of affect things as well for you?
It's definitely daunting. It's something that I do find myself thinking about quite a lot. I think in the short term it is sadly going to shrink our industry a bit, because there is a certain amount of music. There's a certain amount of music already which is occupied by sort of royalty-free library music, production music, which has for a few years now been written very cheaply and is sold very cheaply. Because no one's really making much money. The only people making money off that are the people who are licensing vast volumes of it, i.e. the big companies, and they're not paying out royalties, and there's all kinds of like issues with that. And that is definitely going to get eaten up by AI, because as soon as the big tech guys can write that stuff at the click of a mouse, they will. So I think the level at which human-made music begins is basically just gonna rise. I think in the next few years, I think that's quite realistic. That kind of stuff at the more budget end of production music, I think will vanish. But as I've talked about, one of the really important things in this job is how you communicate with directors and producers. So
AI can't have a conversation, can it? As well.
Not
not yet.
Who knows? Yeah. But I think actually what AI really struggles with is versioning something it's already done.
Okay.
I heard a story about a graphic design house that hired a whole load of prompters to put a whole load of pitch images together for a project, and instead of hiring some graphic designers, they hired some prompters. Yeah. And they came up with a whole load of images, took it to the superior, and they said, these are great, but can we change this and this? Yeah. And they plugged it back into the AI, and they got a whole new set of images came through. Okay. So it can't work on notes. Yeah. And actually, one of the fundamental things of this job is going, this is good.
Just that one element needs changing.
It's that nuance of change. Yeah. The drums are good, but they're a bit to this or they're a bit to that. Okay. And I mean, that's a really kind of nuanced human
that
thing.
Hands-on, that sort of kind of granular editing, let's say.
For sure, yeah. And actually sometimes humans get that wrong, because you get sent some notes and it's like, can you make this a bit brighter? And you go, okay, I've done that, and it's like, oh no, I didn't mean brighter, I meant this or that. Fair. And that's where I think the bespoke side of hiring a human will hopefully last for a good while longer.
Fair. Well, fingers crossed, though. Fingers crossed.
It's all crossed, yeah.
I was going to say, this podcast will become a little bit dry if I'm just talking to a computer every week.
Well, I think just the wave of content that is coming that will, I mean, who knows what they're going to be able to produce.
Watch this space, eh?
Watch this space, yeah.
So last question, Paddy, and obviously, look, thank you so much for being here.
At all.
What legacy are you hoping to leave? Big question, I know. Oh. But no, let's what are you hoping to sort of kind of leave behind as this was Paddy Fletcher?
I mean, I'm trying to think when will legacy kick in? I mean, I guess that's the thing. Everything I'm doing now is being recorded in ink on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely,
so you have to be prepared for that. But
I think careful what you say.
I think I have always said that it would be great to have some, either a piece of music or some music that's attached to a project that people can really engage with, come back to, watch, and where hopefully my music is kind of a sort of integral part of what made that particular thing. Absolutely. Whether it's a great advert, there's some of those like rewatchable adverts that you find yourself watching, or a TV show, maybe a particular theme tune to a TV show, something that people kind of connect with on that kind of level.
Resonate,
and it'd be great even if there was one theme tune or one thing that was still doing the rounds on YouTube. It's like that. Even if my name isn't even attached to it, sometimes you can have like someone will bootleg a theme tune up onto YouTube. It's like, and then everyone's like, who did this? And like no one knows who it was, but people really like it. And I think it'd be great to have a piece of music that does just click and resonate with people. That'd be amazing. And I think if there was one piece of music just still out there, and who knows how long. It's weird because it's all going to be everything we do now is like it's going to be there forever.
Yeah, you've got a whole DNA track there.
That'd be nice if there was still something doing the rounds out there.
Look, I have no doubt that'll happen. I wish you the very best.
Thanks very much, Ben.
Paddy, thank you very much. I appreciate you coming. There we go.
It's been great fun.
Cheers, buddy.
Thanks,
mate.
Thanks.
That's right. Well, there we have it. Episode 1 of Beats Learning. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. It was fantastic having Paddy on as our first guest. He gave some wonderful comments about his journey so far, what he's up to next, and hopefully some advice for everyone out there as well. If you did like today's video, please like and subscribe. It's a great way for a young channel like this to see the support from the audience out there, so that I know I'm doing something that's useful to everyone. We'll be back soon with our next guest, so be sure to follow to make sure that you're updated and kept in the loop with everything at Beats Learning. I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. Bye.